14 months of effort, including contributions from very many people here in this room who gave their time and their insight, many sponsors, and so we're pleased to be releasing it. We're a bit relieved after 14 months to be releasing this, but needless to say, it was a very big topic, and it more than justified the investment. We're also pleased that this event this morning is a collaboration with several key partners, including the World Affairs Council, the Association of European American Chambers and Business Associations, DLA Piper, and Europort. So the idea for this project began actually 7 years ago, so this has been longer than 14 months even, when a number of consul general friends from Europe commented that we at the Institute were writing and talking a lot about Asia and about China, and wouldn't it be a nice thing if we might say something about Europe, which seemed to be a very valid suggestion, and so we launched into that, and what we found has been both enlightening and actually compelling. Despite the tremendous interest in Asia, and those of you who know the Institute know we've written a lot about China and Asia. We just released a big China report about a month ago. What we found in this report is that our ties with Europe are no less critical, and in fact, in some respects, are even stronger than they are with China and Asia. So we think that the information that's going to be presented in this report will provide a unique perspective on the Bay Area's ties with Europe, but on the entire spread of its ties with business and economic partners from around the world. So we hope that you find it interesting and useful. The report itself is a platform for what we hope and expect will be continued activity focused on business ties with Europe throughout the year and beyond as well.
Thank you, Sean and Tracey, for this wonderfully informative report. There's a great need to talk about Europe here in San Francisco, in California, and the proof is that a dear friend of mine, highly educated, really well-traveled, he came to me and said, "What is that funny flag with those wonderful yellow stars in your office near the Italian flag?" That's the European flag. So there's a great deal to communicate better about the European Union, what the European Union is, not only as the sum of the member states, but as a new synergy that has been at work for a long time in the post-Second World War era in Europe. As you mentioned, Sean, the research has been partly financed by the European delegation in Washington, D.C., and we now have a new system of EU local chairs. The EU delegation in Washington, D.C. is also relying on consulates to represent Europe all over America. At this very moment, the local chair is Greece, and I would like to recognize my colleague Dimitris Senitelos, the Greek Consul General. He's not here, can't be here with us today, but in a way I humbly represent him. Italy, the Italian consulate, will be the EU local chair starting from the 1st of July for 12 months until the 3rd of June 2015. The report is so informative. It really conveys the breadth and the depth of the relations between the Bay Area and Europe. And I don't want to delve into it. There will be lots of figures, and the discussion will follow. Two figures are very important. The fact that 49% of all the investment, global investment generated in the Bay Area comes from Europe, and also that 39% of all the patents generated by ventures with foreign partners come from Europe. These two figures by themselves highlight the weight and importance of Europe for this part of the world, which we have to highlight and valorize. It is a very important transition time for Europe at the moment. So it's an exciting time to talk about Europe for many reasons. When I came here 1.5 years ago, I had to join my colleagues, European colleagues, for a panel on explaining why the Europe's demise was not a possibility. You know, if you read the press, it seemed that every day we had to do away with the euro and move on. Instead, the euro is there to stay. And so the worst of the European crisis is behind our shoulders. We're looking ahead, the economy is picking up, and there's a new phase, we could say a European comeback, which we will experience in the coming years. Also, the European countries have reformed themselves, have taken the opportunity of taking very unpopular measures during this time of transition. So you will see a much stronger Europe in the years ahead. From a specific American perspective, this is an exciting time also because of the so-called TTIP, which is the negotiation that was launched in July 2013 to reach a comprehensive trade and investment partnership between the US and the EU. The goal is creating new jobs by eliminating duties, creating a free space for commercial services, achieving a greater regulatory compatibility between the two blocks, and also create a level playing field for investment. California is poised to gain from this partnership if it is completed, and as you point out in the report, California is expected to have a 26% increase in its exports to Europe. This is a very tangible sign of what the interests that unite the Bay Area and Europe are. But there's not only the interest, the economic part. Let me mention also the fact that there are common values between Europe and the United States we should not underestimate. At the end of May, we will have European elections. General European elections abroad, but in the US also are met with yawns. What's going to happen? Why is that relevant? Well, I think that the Ukrainian events have shown the importance of the European Union. And it's not by chance, it's a very symbolic fact that the presidential elections in Ukraine will take place on the 25th of May, at the same time as the European election, the election for the European Parliament, that will start a process for selecting the new leadership of the European Union for the next 5 years. So interest, common values, many good reasons to talk about Europe here today. Thank you very much, Sean and Tracey. Thanks to the Bay Area Council, thanks to the sponsors. One final word to say that in the second part of the year, we're planning a European week with my EU colleagues and also with the Bay Area Council. So stay tuned, and we'll be able to go in depth and discover new aspects of this partnership, transatlantic partnership. Thank you very much, and enjoy this event. Thank you.
Well, good morning. My name is Patrick Patterson, and I'm the chair of the newly established Association of American European Chambers of Commerce and Business Associations. We want to thank Sean, the Bay Area Council Economic Institute, for inviting us to be part of this informative event and to give us the opportunity to make our announcement here today. The announcement is this organization, our Association for American European Chambers of Commerce and Business Associations, was recently incorporated, and it was formed to network and expand our connectivity among 12 similar American European chambers and business organizations. These organizations include the British American Business Council, the Business Association Italy America, California Spain Chamber of Commerce, Danish American Chamber of Commerce, French American Chamber of Commerce, the German American Business Association, German American Chamber of Commerce, Hungarian American Chamber of Commerce, the Irish Network, the Swedish American Chamber of Commerce, Swiss American Chamber of Commerce, and last but not least, the U.S. Polish Trade Council. So when you think of it, these organizations, they count over 2,000 members with over 300 events per year, and each one of those organizations are also part of a domestic and international network of like chambers and business organizations that are available to their members. So what's happened, the history behind this, is that for over 10 years we've been periodically organizing events together, but around 4 years ago we decided to take our initiative to the next level. This is when our group grew to what we know today, and more established structure and more dynamic approach. By coming together Today our focus is to promote and facilitate working relationships among members of our organizations, contribute to the economic, commercial, and financial relations between California and European businesses. In short, we aspire to be a platform and a conduit to assist in California-European commercial exchanges. So when we look at this local environment, and as our technology evolves, it also gives us tools to work with. And that comes with information, more information that is available today. But the purpose of our organization is to help our businesses, our business members, to get onto the most direct route to answer these needs for growth, development, and network with the right local and global partners. So our events in the Bay Area focus on a wide variety of industries, of course, that we serve, that we all know here. The high-tech, biotech, sustainability, all the way to food and wine. With topics of interest such as economic recovery, global trade, or even visa issues. These events are conducted in conference formats or roundtables, such as today's event, with a topic such as today that is directly impactful to our members. We also host trade missions for American European organizations, and today we'll offer a broader platform for new requests going forward. So we've been a success to date by fulfilling this need for a broader platform, and yet we aspire to go farther, more in the future. The future is filled with opportunities, we think, and this organization meets that future with the ability to deliver on the needs of our members and respond to requests from inside and outside the organization. For those interested in finding out more, first of all, I invite everyone to participate, to come to our May the 8th networking event in Palo Alto. And then today also to reach out to any one of our association board members that are here at this event. So just so that you know who they are, I'd like to ask those board members to at least rise and identify yourselves so that members of the audience here know who you are. So please. Thank you very much for your interest, and Sean, again, thank you very much for this opportunity to partner.
So the region's relationship with Europe has very deep historical roots. Of course, it goes back, like most of California, to the Spanish missions in the 1700s, the northernmost of which was in Sonoma, and of course spread from there south into much of Northern California. But it really took off, like our relationships with the rest of the world, during the gold rush, 1849, and in the early to mid-1850s. And there was a period that produced large communities of Europeans here in the Bay Area, San Francisco primarily, but really throughout the region, and that produced iconic companies that are still highly visible and leaders in our business community today. If you look at the graphics, the one on the left is Sutter's Mill. So John Sutter, who owned the famous mill, was from Switzerland. You see the city map there. South Park, I think all of us know, if we know where it is this lovely circle of residences around the park in the middle of the new tech district in south of Market. It's kind of this little island there. Well, it's interesting for a reason. It was designed, actually, and developed by somebody from Britain called George Gordon, who liked Berkeley Square in London. If you know Berkeley Square, it's one of these areas with very nice residential townhouses surrounding the green. So if you ever go to South Park, you can just think, well, this is sort of our 1800s version of Berkeley Square. The French community has been enormous here from the outset. The Church of Notre Dame de Victoire near Union Square was actually built at a small chapel on that site in 1849. So we could go on and on about these deep historical and cultural roots of institutions that are still here to this day. But I think it's really important to note some of the key companies that really represent that era that have carried forward. Maybe the most iconic, of course, is Levi Strauss, founded by a German immigrant who came to the gold rush, but decided there was actually more money to be made by making what became denim blue jeans. I never realized before looking into this that the word denim comes from the French phrase denim, from the city of Nîmes in France, that made a very sturdy fabric that Levi Strauss took and adapted with copper bolts to make denims. And so today, obviously, Levi Strauss is a Fortune 500 company, 4.5 billion in revenue, and by the way, it has its European headquarters now in London. We all know Ghirardelli chocolate, of course, also comes from the same era. Boudin Bakery, the original yeast from the gold rush that was developed by Boudin is still the yeast used today to make the sourdough bread we buy on the waterfront and elsewhere. So these stories could go on, but since then there's been a really rich legacy of Europeans contributing to the economy here in the region. If you look at the street pattern, for example, that was laid out by an Irish immigrant, Jasper O'Farrell, so these streets that march up and down the hills. That was his plan. The Hetchetchy water system was developed by Michael O'Shaughnessy, another immigrant from Ireland. We are drinking the water today from the system that he designed and built. And this, of course, could go on as well. See the Young Museum. There are a number of really remarkable iconic public buildings, museums, but soon commercial buildings designed by extremely well-known European architects, and I think they are putting their imprint on our city and our region as well, even as we speak. And would be remiss in, if I didn't mention wine, that there's been a long historic relationship in the wine industry. The industry was actually founded in Northern California, our California industry by European immigrants, primarily from Germany and from France and from Italy. You can see some of the wineries they founded still operating today. Buena Vista, Charles Krug, Beringer, Sebastiani, and Simi. And then we have a very significant presence by European wine producers that have invested and have facilities here in the region, such as Artisa, Gloria Ferrera, Miramar Estate, which is from Catalonia, Domaine Carneros, Mum Napa, Domaine Chandon, and more besides. So you can see there's a very, very diverse set of relationships that trace back to people who founded companies who came here to the Bay Area in California looking to build a future, and many of them did spectacularly successfully. So this is, I'm going to go forward and then back to make sure I'm on the right slide. Okay, we'll go backwards. We'll just go backwards. Oh, there we go. Good, thanks. Got to remind myself which button goes which way. So Europe's presence can be seen today in a very rich weave of institutional and organizational ties. This just summarizes a few of them. The area is home to a rich array of cultural organizations with European focus. Many of them date back actually to the 1800s and early 1900s, which suggests the depth of the human and family relationships we have here that are active today in and with Europe. At the governmental level, the region hosts the largest collection of European consulates, the European diplomatic presence outside of Washington, D.C. and New York, with 30 European nations represented here in the region. There are also more than 14 binational business organizations. As we've heard from Patrick, they are getting together now to coordinate their efforts, and they make an important contribution. As we know, many are in this room this morning. 12 Bay Area cities have sister city relationships in Europe, and the region is also host to an expanding number of incubators and accelerators connected to Europe, and we'll talk more about those in just a moment. The region is also host to a very large and a very diverse number of trade and investment offices that are sponsored by national governments, but also by European cities, states, and provinces. And many of these offices are parts of global networks that they operate in key locations around the world. The Bay Area and San Francisco in particular is one of those key nodes in those global networks. And typically they're designed to promote exports from their country or their region or city and investment coming in. but also in the Bay Area there's something different and unique. They all have, to a significant degree, the focus of connecting their city, region, province, or country to the Bay Area's innovation and technology networks, which are seen as being very important to the development of their own companies and technology networks and their own innovation systems at home, which is something I think that really stands out in the Bay Area compared to most other places in the U.S. And that actually can be said about the Bay Area's diplomatic presence. Of course, the consulates do consular functions for their citizens, but in the Bay Area, I think it's safe to say every consulate has an important role in being a connector for its country and its businesses into the technology and innovation community here in the region. I could mention just a few of those business connectors, or rather the national and city-based organizations. You've got Osio Silicon Valley, which represents Catalonia, the Bavarian Office for Economic Development on the West Coast, Czech Invest, Enterprise Estonia, Germany Trade and Invest, IDA Ireland, Enterprise Ireland, Invest Northern Ireland, London and Partners, the Paris region, Scottish Development International in Wales. So that's quite a portfolio of offices representing places in the world that want to be here and want to be connected here. So it's pretty remarkable. And moving ahead then to the topic of trade. So Europe, with 500 million mostly wealthy by global standards consumers, absorbs and represents 20% of all the world's imports and exports. So this is an enormous market, any way you look at it. Europe accounts for about 18% of the Bay Area's exports. That makes it the third largest trade partner for the region in the world after Asia and NAFTA, Canada and Mexico. It's actually been dropping a little bit in recent years, I think due to the economic situation in Europe compared to the NAFTA countries. But I think there are three things that are remarkable and noteworthy about our trade with Europe. One is beyond the $9.2 billion in goods that are exported every year from the Bay Area to Europe. One, that trade is roughly in balance. That is not the case everywhere in the world. Our trade with Europe is basically in balance, which is very important. Second, Europe is often the first overseas destination for companies from here that are looking to get into overseas markets. And that's because of its accessibility, its scale, and its legal transparency, which is something that can't always be said of every place else in the world. And thirdly, and this is something that is easily overlooked, Europe buys 35% of the region's services exports. So we're a high-end economy. A lot of what we do isn't made. A lot of it is services. And that 35% is a much higher percentage than you would find in most of the U.S. So that's very, very important. And when we talk a little bit later about TTIP, which Mauro mentioned, we can talk about how we can grow these numbers even more. Also, it's worth noting that Europe, our trade with Europe, both service and physical trade, is supported by extremely robust air links. There are 9 carriers that provide more than 35,000 seats per week on direct flights to Europe, and passenger traffic between the Bay Area and Europe actually grew 8.3% from 2012 to 2013. So you hear about, oh, well, the economy in Europe isn't that great. Well, it's getting better, but if you look at our people traveling to and from Europe, that is actually the strongest growth in air travel we're seeing today for the SFO market. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my co-author and our vice president at the Institute, Tracey, to pick up on themes of talent, research, and investment.
Thank you, Sean. Tom Friedman said the world is flat. Richard Florida said, no, it's spiky, as high concentrations of talent and capital accumulate in the world's innovation hubs. But you know what? It's not just about the spikes. It's about the connections across spikes. Cross-border connections in the form of talent flows, patent collaboration, and investment drive innovation and translate into new economic value. By multiple measures, Europe is an essential partner in the Bay Area's innovation system. Going back to the gold rush, San Francisco was born cosmopolitan. As people came from around the world seeking their fortune. Today, nearly a third of the Bay Area's residents were born abroad. The global draw to the region continues. Today, 170,000 residents of the Bay Area were born in Europe. Our European-born neighbors are highly educated. While they make up just 2.4% of our total population, they account for 11% of our STEM professionals. They are particularly concentrated in biomedical fields. They make up 11% of medical scientists and 8% of physicians and surgeons. On the topic of global competitiveness, here we go. We hear a lot about rankings. Who's top in research funding, who's top in patents. The problem with rankings is that they typically represent a single point in time and tell us nothing about the trajectory. The other problem with rankings is that they serve to perpetuate a zero-sum view of the world, which actually inhibits collaborative activities and distracts from the most interesting part of the story, namely who's creating what with whom and what global patterns can be observed. Europe and the Bay Area are global leaders in research and technology, and they collaborate intensely. Bay Area inventors are increasingly registering patents with partners outside the US. More and more, innovation is becoming a cross-border activity. Patents registered with European partners account for 39% of all Bay Area patents registered with foreign partners since 1999, and this activity is on the rise. With over 1,000 affiliates, European companies make up 1/3 of all foreign companies in the Bay Area, the strongest foreign presence of any global region. And there are over 3,200 Bay Area affiliates in Europe. Cross-investment is diverse, but it is concentrated in technology. In particular, foreign companies are opening up R&D centers here in order to tap into our unique talent base and establish connections with our diverse technology base. Europe and the Bay Area actively invest in each other. Private equity investment with Europe is strong, building on market opportunity, shared business practices, and mutual commitment to transparency and the rule of law. In 2012, Bay Area investment to Europe reached $3.3 billion. This is primarily private equity, but also includes some venture capital. This $3.3 billion exceeded the region's total investment in the rest of the world. Similarly, 49% of all foreign capital flowing to the Bay Area came from Europe. Following the downturn in 2000, a lot of local investment went abroad, and particularly to China. And since then, the Bay Area's investment in China has been comparable to its investment in Europe. However, European investment in the region vastly outshadows that from China. China accounted for about 3% of total global investment in the Bay Area in 2012. The Bay Area's highly developed innovation ecosystem is not just about technology. It's about the highly specialized business services and the networks that broker valuable connections for talent, access to technology, and investment. Part of the Bay Area's success is found in the region's strong ties with other innovation hubs in the world. As connections between Europe and the Bay Area continue to increase, and with them professional and creative networks, new areas of innovation are appearing. The result is the emergence of a post-national innovation system, where the frame of reference is not bounded by national or even regional borders, but by the diversity and geographic reach of a company or an individual's network. Evidence is emerging across multiple areas. Startups are launching as global companies with teams of different nationalities scattered across Europe and the Bay Area. Patents, as I said, are increasingly registered by teams of inventors from multiple countries. Companies are setting up R&D centers across the world, tapping into specialized talent pools and research facilities. All of these activities support the movement of people and the exchange of ideas and best practices. So, Sean, can you help illustrate this for us?
I would be happy to. Okay. So as Tracey said, as a global center, let's say the global center for technology and innovation, the Bay Area consistently attracts very large numbers of entrepreneurs and technology-based companies from around the world. And they're basically seeking to tap into the vein of innovation and venture finance and global business that very often originates here in a very unique way. So this is especially the case with Europe, we found, where there are very major European technology-based companies that are both manufacturing and conducting research here. No one thinks who manufactures in the Bay Area. Well, guess what? There's some pretty sophisticated stuff being produced here in the Bay Area by key European companies, as we'll hear just a little bit later. There are lots of prominent examples, but Bayer, SAP are good ones. And we put this photo up here of the Bay Bridge lights. We all see those. So those lights were actually produced in San Jose by the Dutch company Philips Lumileds, that basically runs their global lighting business and technology research business out of the Bay Area. And the design of the system was done by another Philips entity on the East Coast. So when we see the bridge every night, just to think, well, those are actually produced by a Dutch company operating here in the Bay Area. There is also a very large number of technology listening posts, and these are offices, often quite substantial, of European companies. They may be technology-based, or at least they're technology-connected. They might be telecom companies, they might be others, that have facilities here designed to scan, search, and connect to sources of innovation and technology coming out of the Bay Area. And the general belief, they're all a little bit different, but the general line of approach is that innovation is happening faster here than anywhere else. And it's happening very often faster than the in-house R&D that these larger companies can conduct. And that's also true of US companies, by the way. And therefore, they need to be here in order to understand and tap into whatever is coming next in the R&D space, in the business model innovation space, especially as it applies to information technology, so as not to be caught behind the curve and to invest in things that will keep them at the leading edge of their industries as they're affected by technology. So very often they will be connected to and engaged with universities like Stanford and Berkeley. Typically they are looking to collaborate with large companies like Google and Cisco, but in pretty much every case they're engaged with startups. They're scanning for startups that may have a product or a service or technology with a disruptive potential that could maybe affect their business model or that could help their business model if it were to grow to scale. And in some cases they may invest in these companies, in some cases they may acquire them, in some cases they may support them. We find a tremendous amount of activity by these European, we're calling them technology outposts, something that only happens here in the Bay Area. At a different level, there's quite an array of European connected and European sponsored incubators and accelerators that are working to connect entrepreneurs and startups from across Europe with the Bay Area and its venture capital community and with potential partners. So as you can tell from this, it's not all about technology, but if we ask what is unique about the connection to the Bay Area and what brings entrepreneurs and startups and large companies as well, very often it's the connection to innovation, technology, and to entrepreneurship. So we pause just a second on the topic of entrepreneurs and what brings them here. So at any one moment, and nobody has an idea really, but there are probably at least 300 and probably more European startup companies that are here in the Bay Area. They come through incubators and accelerators. A lot come independently. Many have succeeded in establishing Bay Area roots. A representative number of those are listed and talked about a bit in the report. But as a rule, they're coming to tap into venture investment, into the region's unique talent pool, its service pool, access the US market, and scale their companies globally. So we put this slide up here on venture capital to kind of show the difference in the sources of venture capital in the US and Europe, because this is one of the things that drives these younger companies here. And what you can see on the left is that in the US, venture is overwhelmingly private capital. In Europe, it tends to be much more coming from government agencies and from banks, which is different. It's a different kind of chemistry. The other bigger issue, though, I think, for European startups is the amount of venture funding raised or invested in Europe is typically no more than 20 to 25% of what's available in the US. So if you're a startup in Europe, in most cases there's pretty ample angel investment available. But it is really hard to get Series A or B funding and scale up with the support of venture capital. So at a point that a company really needs to get that venture investment, not to say it's impossible in Europe, not to say that there aren't Bay Area investors from the venture community that go to Europe, for the most part, they see a need to come here to the Bay Area. The other thing that happens is they tend to come here when they need to scale up. So let's say you're in a Nordic country. So Nordic countries are incredibly innovative. They have a lot of very bright entrepreneurial people. They get good support from their governments, but the national markets are quite small. And so it often happens, why we see so many entrepreneurs here from Norway and Estonia and Sweden and elsewhere is because at a certain point, when they need to go global and go national, they have to go outside of their home markets. And very often the Bay Area is the first place to come because you can grow into the US market, but you can also grow into global markets as well. The other thing I actually didn't mention about the venture investment is that Europe's venture world is still nationally fragmented. If you're in Italy, you can probably get some in Italy. If you're in France, maybe some in France, but it's not a pan-European market. So it's really hard, again, even with a limited pool available, it's hard to get or raise funds on a European basis. Again, those are things which push them in this direction. So many come here, several hundred at least at any one time. And for those that succeed, the result is typically a binational company. They may have their headquarters in Europe and a US subsidiary here. Some may move their headquarters here and have a subsidiary in Europe. Typically, the management, the investment sourcing, the market development will be here. Typically, they still do their engineering at home where there are plenty of talented engineers and it's less expensive. And in the end of the day, they end up hiring and creating jobs in both places. So this binational model. It goes back to this system that Tracey was talking about sort of this post-national innovation system. So this just lists a bunch of stuff, but very important stuff. You can see on the left an examples of the incubators and accelerators. There's quite a lot. Some are not focused on any one country, but they host large numbers of startups from other countries, most of whom tend to be here from Europe. You have some that are nationally focused, such as the French Tech Hub that President Hollande just announced here in town a couple of months ago, the German Silicon Valley Accelerator, Mind the Bridge in Italy, the Spain Tech Center. So you can see this combination of larger incubators and accelerators that take in significant numbers of European startups and a lot of dedicated ones, sponsored typically by their governments, often as public-private partnerships, to enable their younger companies to come here, kind of absorb the Bay Area, Silicon Valley ethos, get connected to potential partners, and hopefully grow. I mentioned the technology connectors. These are the larger companies. You can see a lot of those on the right. You can see that they're very diverse. They cover a range of industries from biotech, lots from telecom, IT, of course. I think it's interesting to note the number of European automobile companies that have outposts here, and they're doing what U.S. automobile companies are doing, which is trying to figure out how IT innovation coming from here is going to change the future of the automobile. And you could repeat this across a number of sectors, but this is just representative of the scale of Europe's presence here, both for small companies and also for much, much larger ones. And finally, we say in the report something at the end about future connections. This is obviously a rich base to build on. More could be done. We heard earlier from Mauro about TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership that's being negotiated right now. Between Europe and the US, we account for 45% of the world's economy, so that is a big piece of the world economy. If we could bring those two pieces closer together, it would, needless to say, be a big deal. Tariff barriers are actually pretty low already, so a lot of the focus of the negotiation now is on regulatory standards, where let's say you're going to export something in one direction or another, and you need to go through some kind of a regulatory check, meet some kind of a national standard, then you do it again on the other side. Well, the standards are quite similar. If they could be harmonized, it would reduce friction in the system, speed things up. And a study done recently for the British Consulate in Washington and the Bertelsmann Institute estimated that a successful TTIP would probably generate or support about 750,000 US jobs, of which about 75,000 would likely be in California, which would make California as a state the largest beneficiary of a successful TTIP. Immigration reform, we could talk a lot about that, but issues we came up against, or we were informed of, things like H-1Bs, where if you're a European startup here, it's pretty hard to compete for the limited pool of H-1Bs when Google is sucking them up. And you hear H-1B complaints from a lot of companies anyway, but it does affect startups and it affects European startups. I think the more significant issue, though, is the absence in the U.S. of what we would call an entrepreneur visa. It is just very difficult, for example, for a young company to come here, go through an incubator and accelerator, and then they don't have the necessary investment to stay longer. The investors tell them, oh, we could invest in you, but you have to be here. There's a chicken and the egg. They go home. They come back on tourist visas. There are ways that we could design a visa for entrepreneurs from any country that would enable them to stay and grow here and contribute to our economy as well as their economy at home. So there's some discussion in the report about that. Regulatory streamlining. European companies are affected just as our own by inefficiency. If we had a one-stop shop, maybe in the governor's office in Sacramento, that would make this a more transparent, efficient process, that could help. And then the last thing I would mention is these binational startups. Some of our accelerators are actually opening up now in Europe, in London and Berlin, in Italy perhaps, in Spain. So it's moving in both directions, and we make some suggestions in the report for ways that the chances of success for a lot of these startups that are binational, they have roots here and roots in Europe, could be enhanced. So, to wrap this up, what we found was that trade is really big. It can be grown bigger if we have a successful TTIP. That's an opportunity. We found that investment, however, is the big story. These are economies that are investing in each other at a very large scale. Technology is often the key connector, which can be seen in this cross-investment, the R&D, the human capital flows. And these are countries that are already operating with a high degree of integration. It's just not obvious. You don't see it on the street every day, but these are highly integrated, advanced economies, which suggest a relationship at a different level from what you find in Asia and elsewhere today. So we think that these are important perspectives to consider when thinking about the full portfolio of the Bay Area's ties with its global partners as Europe's economy is recovering now, and with a successful TTIP, hopefully, there is an opportunity to grow it even further. So I'll say, the report is online, www.bayareaeconomy.org, and for more perspective now, I'd like to invite our terrific panel up to fill in some of the blanks and give their own perspectives on what they're seeing in their companies and their organizations. We have Katharina, the Senior Vice President for Solution Validation at SAP Labs, right there. John Hartnett, who is the founder and CEO of SDG Partners, and he's the president of the Irish Technology Leadership Group, the end. Eilif, who is the chair for Entrepreneurship and Learning, SIG at Silicon Vikings, which is the association of Nordic companies and entrepreneurs here in the Bay Area. They've got a great logo with horn helmets on it. It's in the report. And Duncan, Logan, the CEO and founder of one of our major incubators and accelerators here in the region, RocketSpace. So just to start this off, I just might ask each one of you, maybe starting at that end, George, and moving this way, just to say a little bit about if you have any particular perspective on the findings in the report, but what you're seeing from your own company or organization's perspective in terms of why you're in the Bay Area, what are you doing in the Bay Area, is there something unique about the Bay Area that causes you to be here and to invest?
Thank you, Sean. First of all, I'm very excited to be here at the launch event, and that's both personally and for Bayer Corporation. Personally, I'm living with my family over 10 plus years now in the Bay Area, and my daughters all enjoy the UC system, the excellent one. From a Bayer Corporation perspective, we are in the Bay Area 40 years plus, and really get exposed to the growth in the Bay Area when we decided to go into biotech, and when biotech actually in Germany was not on the list to be desired, and that basically initiated the growth. If I look at today, we basically have a footprint in the East Bay with manufacturing of really one of the most complicated biotech drugs, which is a factor VIII for hemophilia, which we are producing in the Bay Area for worldwide supply. And we have now, since a couple of years in Mission Bay, we have our research group, which basically brings then the new entities over to development, which we have also on the Berkeley side. So we are uniquely set up, I would say, in the Bay Area, coming from research over development and then launching the drugs. And what I've seen in addition is that over the past years, we also launched kind of what you said, the collaborator, we call it, which is basically an outpost looking into hunting for innovation and also for young startups. And I'm happy to report that we have meanwhile 6 companies, little startups in our collaborator, and 3 are actually also coming from outside of the Bay Area. So pretty successful, and I think the Bay Area continues to be a delight outpost for innovation.
Hi, my name is Duncan, Logan. I'm actually Scottish. We are still part of the European Union at the moment, but I may not be invited here next year. We seem determined to commit suicide. A very determined race. So technology, software is eating the world. I don't care what industry you work in, from education, agriculture to retail, it's rapidly becoming a technology world. Technology has a very strong cluster dynamic, and we are seeing these clusters form now around the world. We are very excited. Obviously, Silicon Valley has always had a very strong technology cluster, but we are very excited at what we're seeing happening in Europe, London, Berlin, Amsterdam, and a number of other cities. If anyone is interested in that sector, reading The New Geography of Jobs by Enrico Moretti is an excellent book on what we're seeing there. So we see the collaboration between startups and large corporates happening at pace, and we think that's going to expand into Europe and is going to be a fantastic thing as we see this global expansion of technology.
Thanks, Duncan. Can I just say, we're seeing that the projector is sort of hitting you in the face. If you wanted to move up your chairs,
no,
oh, there we are. That worked.
Jeez, there, these people.
Please.
Okay. I'm Eilif Trondsen. I am a board member of Silicon Vikings and chair of the Entrepreneurship and Learning SIG. I have lived here in the Bay Area for 35 years, and all those years are spent on the SRI campus, SRI International, formerly Stanford Research Institute. And it's been really interesting over these years to see the growing interest in the Nordic region about what's happening in the Bay Area. So I commend the Bay Area Council Economic Institute for doing the report. I read that over the weekend, and it was fascinating reading. A lot of good data, so I think you all will enjoy reading it. Now, as a Norwegian, I must admit that I was particularly happy to see some data that's showing Norway gaining a significant increase in Bay Area population here over the period 2007-2011, particularly when we're catching up with the Swedes. And as you know, Sweden and Norway has this friendly competition going on, and so we're catching up with the Swedes, because Sweden, at least the data show, that they did not have much of an increase in the Bay Area population. So the Norwegians, the Danes, and the Estonians are catching up. So Aliba, pay attention. So that was one thing that I found interesting. I think, and we'll probably talk more about what's happening on the entrepreneurial front, as well as on the academic front. And we, and I see this particularly at Stanford and Berkeley, the growing involvement of Nordic students, and those two and probably many other academic institutions in the Bay Area. So they love to come here. Now let's be realistic, the weather is one thing. The Nordic region, in the winter with snow and ice attracts people here. But clearly, we all know there are many other reasons why they want to come here. For those who have lived here for many years, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that.
So my name is Katharina Rock. I'm with SAP. What you see here on the slides, or have seen, is SAP Labs, as well as Biotech. Labs in SAP is the research and development arm. Right? So it's we call SAP is more the country organizations with sales and consulting, and Labs is the research and development arm. We are here since 1996, so that's now 18 years in the Silicon Valley. We started off with locations in Palo Alto. When I joined in 2001, I think we have been in Palo Alto about 600 people. Today in the Bay Area we have 3,500. Right? So we're really investing heavily. What you see, that would include as well the recent acquisitions, Ariba, SuccessFactors, Sybase, and so on. So we're heavily investing in the Bay Area. And we do that because exactly what the report points out, it's the unique pool of talents, it's the unique way of research, university work that we can work with, and the way that we can collaborate with both the research institutions as well as our partners and customers on co-innovation, mainly on the topics of mobile, on the cloud topics, and so on, and on a database. So it's really a unique in the world position to collaborate on a very on the edge or leading edge economic system. And that's what we hear. Okay.
My name is John Hartnett. I'm from Ireland originally. I've never worked for a European company or an Irish company. I've only worked with US technology companies for the last 30 years. Delighted to be here, and thank you for inviting me. Today we run an investment firm, venture capital firm down in Los Gatos, and we also have an accelerator in San Jose where we have about 40 Irish companies and a whole bunch of US companies as well as French companies as well. Just to comment on the report, and from an Irish connection perspective, Ireland is a small country, but it's actually punched way above its weight in the technology world. 40% of all the FDI investment coming into Ireland is coming from the West Coast. It is some of the top technology companies, namely, Intel, Apple, Google, Cisco, etc. Intel recently celebrated its 25 years history in Ireland, where it has invested more than 5 billion. The big change, I suppose, that's happening in Ireland is that it has gone through a very tough recession, 2008 to just last year. And now what's happening in Ireland is technology is really taking centre stage. Not just the companies from here, but now technology companies from Ireland that have come here. Namely companies like Stripe. It's a $2 billion company based here right here in San Francisco. You're now starting to see a lot of Irish companies come here. Today, US companies employ about 100,000 people in Ireland, and Irish companies employ about 90,000 people here in the US. So it's very much a two-way relationship. And then just finally, yes, we brought water to San Francisco, and we had the streets of San Francisco with Jasper O'Farrell. But you forgot to mention the most important things: the two other drinks, Irish coffee and Guinness.
We need to open a Guinness plant here. That would be the next big move. So let me maybe ask Eilif and Duncan and you, John, for the startups coming here, are there particular obstacles they face? It's not an easy thing for one of our startups to get going. But are there things you think that are friction in the system, things that could or should be addressed that would make it easier for this flow to continue and to grow?
I'll start. I think immigration has been widely known. The H-1B system, I think, is used up within a week, sometimes even quicker. For other entrepreneurs coming over here, it really is a case of coming over here on a tourist visa, spending 90 days, getting as much done as possible, getting out of the country again, waiting until you're kind of clear enough to come back, doing it again, and then hoping you can persuade someone to give you funding, which then will start the processes. We constantly see a number of companies trying to get into the US and ended up heading to Canada or other countries that make it easier. So I think that's the first thing. I think California is getting a reputation around tax. That a lot of companies are coming to start in America or elsewhere, even though they ultimately want to be in California. That's something that California has to be cognizant of.
Yeah, from a perspective of the small companies that I work with in Silicon Vikings, I think there are a number of challenges. It can be hard for small companies to compete in this talent pool here in the Valley. It's incredible what you can get paid if you're a top talent, whether it's in marketing or whatever. So I think Sean mentioned that most of these companies decide to keep much of the technology development at home, and I think that probably makes sense to some degree. But there are some challenges when they grow and they want to bring people over and really build and scale over here. It's tough early to find the venues into the capital markets, but most of them, they stay with it and they do well. A number of Nordic companies have found the risk capital here that they cannot find in the Nordic countries. And then, of course, this high cost of housing and so on. But again, that is nothing new for the Nordics. They face very high costs in the Nordic countries. So, on the positive front, I think most of the organizations representing the Nordic region have done very well in supporting startups, whether from Finland with Techis and others, so Vinnova from Sweden, Innovation Center Denmark, have really catered to these startup companies and providing a very strong support system. And I'm very happy that Innovation Norway set up an operation in Palo Alto now, supporting startup companies and doing some incubation and bringing companies over. So I think that's really good news.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. I totally agree in terms of the whole immigration issue, and obviously it's a big part of this report. The three things that are most important to any company, whether they're European or US, is really access to talent, access to customers, and access to capital. Many European companies will come here, and Irish companies come here for get access to capital. 40% of all venture capital in the United States is invested here, and breaking through and to try and get access there is a challenge for for some companies. I think European companies and Irish, very much in the middle of this, we tend to be very conservative in terms of how we are pitching. And I think we can take lessons from our Californian friends in terms of how we pitch for capital. I also think that from a European perspective, again, I don't think we help each other as much as we could. There's a lot. There's an Irish innovation center. There's an Italian. We do a lot of things individually, and we work as silos. I think with this report and with this opportunity, I think working together, because Irish guys don't want to come all the way over here to be with other Irish people, and likewise Italians don't necessarily want to come over with Italians. I think we can work together better as a European group here, and I would put that out as an opportunity for us.
Thanks. Might ask you, Joerg, and also you, Katharina. So your operations here, they don't exist in isolation. They're not just in the Bay Area. They're part of major global companies. So how do your respective Bay Area operations fit into your parent companies, into the global business model for your companies?
Yeah, sure. So Palo Alto is actually the third largest development location that we have. SAP has a total of 65,000 employees. 13,000 developers or engineering-related functions are in Waldorf, that's close to Heidelberg in Germany. About 5,500 in India, so Bangalore is the second largest hub that we have. And then here with 3,500, we're the third largest. The next one is actually in China, so Shanghai has then a short of 3,000. Right, so it's really all about the network. And we try to leverage just the advantages that we see in the different regions, whether it's talent, whether it's good universities, whether it's an ecosystem of partners and customers. So these are and now we basically, the next innovation center that we just built up is Berlin. Right, so we really try to be at the places where things are happening, because that's all that counts is really the ideas, the collaboration, the co-innovation. And that's why we need to be here, and that's why we need to be in these other places.
Yeah, for us, basically our research center in Mission Bay is one of the 4 research centers in the world. And the nice thing which I see happening with the technology on hand today is that depending on which part in research you are, there's really a global handover of pieces of expertise depending what you're developing. So that is technology enabled. On the other hand, I think we're also sponsoring whatever it is, Lufthansa and United, with some really good flight accommodation between those centers. And then from a global perspective, I think the interaction which we are seeing in our model has really reached the point where also the Bay Area is exporting some of the learnings, for example, and it's similar to SAP, not that we talked about this before, but the collaborator, which we successfully started a couple of years ago, is now also being opened in Berlin within this year. So that's kind of how the learning also goes. But I think technology plays a big role also to enable us to share and grow.
Thank you. So the last question, this is a lightning round, if you can answer in 2 to 3 sentences. So where do you see the Bay Area's business relationship with Europe being 10 years from now? Either from your company standpoint or just where you see the relationship going overall. We'll start with you here.
So from my perspective, in the 10 years, we have a rich pipeline in biotech drugs. So from a Bayer Corporation point of view, I see us still growing in the Bay Area. And I don't want to close. I see Jim in the background. I think the Bay Area Council really needs to continue what it has done very successful in the past and really addressing some of the strategic things like transportation, housing, and other pieces, which, this area is very competitive, innovative, and it has to stay that way. And I think, thanks to Jim and the whole Bay Area Council, the initiative's ongoing, and we all need to support that.
I thought the whole thing was a lightning round. It's just I think there's two things. I think both the Bay Area and Europe cannot rest on their laurels. I think China is a credible threat. In 10 years' time, we'll see a lot more of that. But I think increasingly from what we see with startups, it is a global platform, and startups are co-locating around the world, and I think that's going to continue to grow.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic about the future. And starting next month, when the Norwegian Air Shuttle is starting direct flights from Oslo and Stockholm to Auckland, first time ever, and we discount flights, so expect to see a lot more students and entrepreneurs coming over who can now afford to come over here. But to pick up on Duncan's point on Asia, I think there's an interesting angle there, because I live in Cupertino. I see this every day. Feel like I'm living in Chinatown almost. A lot of Asians coming in, and they're building bridges back to China. I think there's an opportunity for Nordic and other European entrepreneurs to use the Bay Area as a take-off point to Asian markets. And that's something we want to explore in some future meetings of the Silicon Vikings. So.
Yeah, I would really stress the point of the global network, right? For us, it's all about networking. Actually, it's much easier from here to deal with China because of the time difference than it is, for example, to deal with India, right? Simply from a time zone perspective. So I think it's a global network. I think the Bay Area is unique in the mindset that we have, the entrepreneurial mindset, the interest in research and new ideas, which is fascinating that I haven't seen anywhere else yet. So I'm very optimistic as well that this will continue simply because it's so unique.
Yeah, 2 points. One, I think that the pendulum is shifting in terms of the entrepreneurs from Europe are coming here in their droves and they're starting companies. I see the future really about, major Italian companies, major French companies, major Irish companies, Nordic companies really having a much more significant presence here. And secondly, in terms of global networks, we run an Irish Technology Leadership Group. It's a group of 8,000 executives that's grown over the last 7 years. I think networks, European networks, is a real key benefit to those entrepreneurs. So I think really expanding those networks, and again, I would say there's a huge opportunity for us in the room here to get together as a European network and really kind of put our combined networks together, because I don't think we're competitive. I think we're actually complementary to each other.
That was terrific. Thanks. We've got 10 minutes for some questions. We'll fit in as many as we can. Right? There. You have to speak up a little bit.
Sure. Greg DeLong with UIX Global. First of all, thank you, Sean and Tracey, for an incredible summary of a lot of information. I thought it was really interesting that you showcased the Bay Lights project. I understand the emphasis on STEM and finance and all that, but I think as one of the examples of what's going on in the Bay Area, the Bay Lights project, not to discount the incredible support of Phillips, came about from Ben Davis and Illuminate the Arts. So the Bay Area has this incredible creative culture, communities like the Burning Man organization, shared economy, social entrepreneurs. There's amazing things going on around this sort of creative economy that makes entrepreneurs want to live in San Francisco and make the commute to Silicon Valley. I'm wondering, in terms of fostering this creative culture and these other experimental things that are fundamentally are a key part of the innovation ecosystems here, is that something that's on your radar as European interests? And is it something that you can participate in and be proactive about, or is it just a fringe benefit of being in the Bay Area that people want to live here and that's part of the draw?
I would like to say that it should be. I'm really interested to hear what you're doing, and I would like to explore that for Silicon Vikings to see how we can create more connections in that realm, because there's a lot going on in the Nordic arts scene, and I'm sure that there are people there who would be very interested in collaborating with people here. So I would like to follow up with you afterwards to see what my organization could do on that front.
I think technology is an educated person's business. What we know of educated people is they are the most mobile people in any society. What we're seeing around Europe and here in the US is educated educated people and technology people want to live in cool, liberal cities, cool cities. I think there is an imbalance at the moment at where tech has gone with San Francisco, but it is an absolute driver for why people want to live here, is that we have a weird, balanced economy, and I think we should do what we can to protect that.
Another hand, right back there.
Olaf Hansen. I am working with business partners in Europe on the green tech arena, and the biggest hurdle for them is the very weird regulatory landscape. EU has very even playing field in that arena. If they're coming to California, the regs are different in LA versus San Francisco, and I'm curious to hear your comments about regulatory hurdles that you see for European partners coming here.
Yeah, I maybe can comment a little bit, although that's not my field of expertise, green biotech, but we just acquired also a company out in Davis, which is basically going into the green, or is in the green area. And I can only comment on a high level that we see that at least here the environment is much more conducive, and this is kind of around crop protection with natural kind of ingredients, and that we see that application still in the US is favorable over Europe. Long hurdles in Europe. That's my general one, but that's not my field of expertise, so to say.
Yes.
Hi, Marco Marinucci with Mind the Bridge. I just wanted to raise another point for the discussion, more along the lines of the connection between the large corporations and the startups. I think here also on the panel we kind of represent both. And it's interesting because the European Commission just launched a project and we are coordinating it. It is called Startup Europe Partnership. And the core of the Startup Europe Partnership is actually essentially this. So how to help startup scale, just connecting with the corporate development, the environment of the large corporations. And it's funny that we are coordinating it from here, where kind of the action is in Europe. So in addition to actually inviting you all to join the partnership, the question is, how do you see this playing today here between, what kind of experiences you guys have between the connection of large corporations and startup corporations being European corporations, startups being kind of in the both sides of the
We, RocketSpace has both a very active corporate engine and a startup engine. And what's becoming really interesting is that European corporates are coming here and opening accelerator programs, and then European startups are coming here to meet the European corporates rather than back home. And I think it's a really interesting phenomenon that's happening, that a lot of startups are coming to the Bay Area to meet corporates, international corporates who have their access door for innovation based here. And it's something I think the modern world is corporates should be looking at themselves as platforms for innovations, for startups to work on top of those corporate platforms. But yeah, we see that every day. European startups coming here to meet European corporates here in the Bay Area.
Yeah, I see the same thing, and we've had a number of meetings in Silicon Vikings where we invite large companies to really meet the startup companies. I had a meeting just a couple of weeks ago with people from Cisco, and startup companies from the Nordic region love to meet with executives from Cisco to understand what their needs are, and ideally get Cisco as a client, as a reference client. I know that Cisco, IBM, all the big companies are really looking at what has been happening in the Nordic region, because in terms of entrepreneurship and startup activities, it's really taken off. And I'm sure many of you have seen what is happening to, particularly in the mobile sector, in the gaming sector, Supercell, Rovio, company after company are doing really well. And big corporations are interested in acquiring technology in the mobile area particularly. So.
Maybe we can add SAP has SAP Ventures, so we have our own funds that we're funding startups with. We're currently supporting about 500 projects, or startups. But it's not all we do, because we want to work and collaborate in all kinds of ways. We have startup forums where we basically help them give advice on technology, on how to partner with other companies, not just us, and bring them on so they can demonstrate what they do. We have these presentation days where they can pitch their stuff every 3 months in the labs. So it's a very vibrant interaction, I'd say, not just from a funding perspective, but as well from a support perspective, exchanging technologies, giving advice, connecting them with other partners and so on. And yes, we do see European startups on.
Yeah, I think it's an absolutely critical relationship. You know, in our network we have, as I mentioned, 8,000 executives from companies like Intel, Apple, Google, Cisco. You know, Craig Barrett is the chairman of our group, which is the former chairman of Intel. We connect those people with the entrepreneurs, and I think the networks, the accelerators, programs are critical. Now, I do say that corporates don't do a good job in connecting with entrepreneurs. Typically, you know, I've been part of a corporate where there's 12 steps to getting in the door, and it takes 2 years for an entrepreneur who may run out of cash to try and break into a company. So it's really, really critical for both sides, and obviously from a major corporation perspective, you know, disruptive innovation is coming from small startups, so it's really critical for those companies. So it's a two-way relationship, but it's not, I would certainly not say it's fixed. It's certainly broken and getting better in terms of a relationship, and I think the networks, accelerators, etc., play a great role to bring together.
Yeah, just more of the same, a little twist. I think the big companies are innovating the innovation process, and we have to look really outside, and the best place currently to be, and that's where people are really coming into the Bay Area, is the ingredients of the Bay Area, and see how you can do it. And then you have to adjust your corporate structure, you know, that you really can interact at that personal level of scientists and attract, and then bring the funds in, and that's what we're doing also successfully with the collaborator.
Well, that was terrific. We want to respect your time because we're up to 10:30. Before we formally close this down, I want to thank our panel, who has been absolutely spectacular. I want to thank my co-author and collaborator, Tracey Grose. I want to once again thank the European Commission and all of our sponsors locally. I want to thank Wells Fargo. I want to also flag for you that there will be a second event about this project on May 1st at the Area Council's Conference Center. So the invitations will go out to that maybe tomorrow. So don't be confused if you get an invitation and say, oh, I just did that. We're going to have a different panel, so a bit of a different conversation. So when you see that, feel free to come back for more if you haven't had enough. Feel free to circulate and share that with friends or colleagues who you might think will be interested. And also, we have at the Institute an ongoing partnership with the Association of European Chambers and Business Associations to organize at least 3 more public forums in the rest of 2014, along with Transatlantic West and DLA Piper, that will focus on very specific topics around Europe, our ties with Europe, and innovation. One will be on the TTIP negotiation. One will be on the whole relationship and environment surrounding innovation, entrepreneurs, and startups. One we expect will be in the fall on green cities, another area with lots of interest and activity and leadership in the Bay Area and in Europe. And we'll also be talking in Europe about these connections, seeing what we can do from the Institute with our partners to help build them further. So if you have further questions for our panel, the good news for you, the bad news for them, is they can't get to the door without going by you. So please waylay them if you want to, but in the meantime, thanks to our partners and thanks very much for coming.